Good afternoon. Thank you, Amina, for your kind introduction and for inviting me today. This design research that you'll see has been conducted by myself, along with my colleague and husband, Rami Al-Samahi. And as Amina mentioned, we've been teaching architecture at Carnegie Mellon University in Qatar, here on the Education City for the better part of a decade. And as an alumna of Columbia University GSAPP, I had the opportunity last year to attend the excellent symposium, Architecture and Representation, the Arab City. So it's especially nice to be here today. By any measure, Qatar is in the midst of explosive transformation. If one looks at the demographics, one is struck by the rapid growth of pace. This is driven by its ambition and fueled by its status as the fourth largest producer of natural gas. The population has trebled in the last 10 years alone, and today it numbers just below the 2.5 million mark. Most people in Qatar are working to build Qatar. Qataris currently only account for 1/5 of the total population. With the influx of migrant laborers, men outnumber women 3-to-1, most of which are building the country, of course. If one looks at the geography, one can see an expansion in Qatar's role as a central player in the region. A series of ambitious infrastructure projects, including upgrades to the highway system, passenger and freight rail lines, and the completion of the new airport, place it at the heart of a networked infrastructure, linking the Gulf region. All of these are intended to connect the city to the regional and global metropolis. At the metropolitan scale, the transformation is equally palpable. Today, Greater Doha is a conurbation expanding over multiple municipalities and is host to over 80% of the country's population. But Doha, of course, was not always this engine of growth. In the book, The Evolving Arab City, Professor Khalid Adham of UAE University posits that the history of Doha can be divided into 4 eras, each defined in part by the prevailing economic driver of the day. Doha began as the small fishing and pearling village of Al Bida. Each farij, or neighborhood, was occupied by a particular tribe or family. These neighborhoods formed in relation to the water, parallel to the tidal flats and salt marshes that lined the shore. Qatar started to see modest income from oil exploitation beginning in the early 1950s. Also significant was the relationship between the ruling family and the British political commissioner, which proved instrumental in moving the country from a Bedouin and pearl diving economy to that of a fledgling modern nation state. Qatar's independence from Britain in 1972 coincided with an exponential rise of oil revenues and a change in leadership in the country. As the father emir, Hamad bin Khalifa, assumed power, a renewed energy was evident in the capital and was reflected in new national priorities. The development of the natural gas sector was translated into substantial investments in education, culture, health, and sports. Qatar's new confidence on the world stage was reflected by major additions to the capital and its bid for world city status. A byproduct of the gas revenue has been the massive development of real estate, both at home and abroad. To understand just how profound is the city's present, we must begin by looking at its not too distant past. In 1947, the village was a series of 8 small settlements. The village of Doha, I should say. It was a series of 8 small settlements, each occupied by a distinct tribe or family, clustered between Al Qut Fort, which is next to the souk, and Doha Bay. In 1956, the first paved roads emerge and a small airstrip is built. Modest merchant docks are built into the bay. In 1959, the town expanded along the coast and into the desert. New streets were built to accommodate the automobile. The concentric settlement patterns continued as the city pushed out and along the shore. The Corniche Road was begun, as was the port of Doha. In 1973, the British planners, Llewellyn Davies, were hired to prepare the capital's first master plan and proposed the crescent shape of Doha Bay. Expansions to the seaport and the airport commence as the city begins to densify. In '88, the Sea Ring Road was complete, which coincided with a policy of land acquisition that contributed to a massive relocation of Qataris from the center towards the sparse periphery. In 1995, settlement spread toward the west and the southwest. The D Ring Road was then complete, allowing for increased development along the edges, and further growth occurred along the outside edge of these new highways, much of which, of course, can be characterized as sprawl. Today, many coastal megaprojects, including Lusail, the Pearl Qatar, Hamad International Airport, and the new port to the south, ensure that a virtually unbroken conurbation exists along the eastern coast of the country, nearly 150 kilometers, from the gas city of Ras Laffan in the north to the oil refineries of Mesaid in the south. Much of this development was initially facilitated by a series of roadways and, from the British, the roundabouts. It was often the roundabouts and associated sculpture that were used as an image to identify Qatar to the outside world. Many served as icons in a period of nation building and modernization, and we lament their loss. There is a profound logic and rigor to the planning of the city, actually, whereby the zones that correspond to Doha's growth over time, not unlike the arrondissement of Paris. The ring roads, A, B, C, D, E, and now F, have structured these zones. In this pattern, you can see the history of the city's growth, like the rings on a tree. Building typologies, materials, and styles allow one to read each decade of growth. Rapid expansion and ultimately the sprawl of the city has given rise to a heavily vehicular-dependent urban culture. Over the past few years, the roundabouts have been removed, and in their place, massive intersections have carved out new spaces in the city. Deference to the car remains a defining characteristic. In the past decade, Doha's outward expansion has been encouraged by its infrastructure of these ring roads and radial spokes. As a result, metropolitan Doha is roughly the size of New York City's 5 boroughs, although it has a population of only 1/4 the size. The forthcoming Doha Metro aims to change this paradigm. Perhaps the best side effect of hosting the 2022 World Cup, the Doha Metro Light Rail effort has been ramped up in anticipation of this event. From an urban perspective, by far the most striking feature of the city is the Corniche, the almost perfectly crescent-shaped shoreline that embraces Doha Bay. While the Corniche is paradoxically Doha's most defining feature and the feature that has most substantially changed over time, in fact, it didn't always exist. Instead, it's a perfect piece of urban design, urbanism elevated to an art form, you could say. In 1973, when the British firm Llewellyn Davies was hired to prepare the master plan for the capital, they proposed to fill in the shallow brackish water to the north to create this shape, and thereby create a new district of the city. Llewellyn Davies' original vision was greatly enhanced by the introduction of William Pereira Associates' plan in 1975 and their design of Daphna, or New Doha, the terminus of the Corniche and a proposed home to 60,000 residents. This land reclamation of Daphna was a symbol of Qatar's new prosperity and development, yet with no total master plan ever adopted, the district of Al Daphna remained complete as the price of oil declined in the 80s, and the Sheraton stood for quite a while as a lonely reminder of the city's grand ambitions. Despite Doha's recent population boom, West Bay did not turn into a dense residential community. There now exists a forest of towers. West Bay is a sign that the city has arrived, but at best it can be seen as a work in progress. Tower bases have little relation to the street, pedestrian sidewalks end abruptly, and there are few activated edges. It's also a classic example of icon building as nation building, whereby each tower is designed as if it were going to stand alone. The buildings that shape a city are manifold. They include not only those that remain standing, and some that were never realized, residing only in drawings, but also those that have been destroyed. Over the years, some of the greatest architects of their respective eras have designed buildings for Doha. These include I.M. Pei, Jean Nouvel, and many of the folks that are here to talk to us at the conference, but also James Sterling, Kenzo Tange, and Philip Johnson, and regional luminaries such as Kamal El-Kafraoui, Rifat Shajiri, and Kanan Makaya. Throughout Doha's built history, buildings from each era have displayed climatic and cultural responses appropriate to their place and time. As the best of Qatar's architecture has tried to find logistics within to work, the screen, the thick wall, the planning efforts have similarly tried to marry local priorities with international best practices. The recently released Qatar National Development Framework, 2010 to 2032, identifies several strategic planning objectives, most importantly, including the development of 3 centers within the capital area of downtown, and an urban growth boundary around the capital region. The need to diversify the state's economy and shift from a hydrocarbon-based economy is a key stipulation of the National Vision Plan. The national budget reflects these priorities, $62 billion, in a race to build a new port, airport expansion, improved roadways, light rail, hotels, and stadia, all in time to host the 2022 World Cup. In a sense, Doha's present built structure is a reflection of sporadic state initiatives and spectacular mega projects, and that brings us back to our present era, from pearling to oil to gas to real estate. Collectively, mega projects define the future city. I'll briefly review a few of these, and with each one, raise a critical question. The Masharab project aims to regenerate Qatar's social and economic vitality in the restored heart of the congested city center. From its location to its studied massing strategy and refined material palette, this mixed-use project for around 27,000 represents a marked difference in approach to most projects in the region. And yet, the project's premise is urban renewal writ large, with little value placed on displacing the prior population or demolishing the past. Though much of the modern fabric has been lost, recent steps suggest that there is at least a concerted effort to save some of it, as can be seen in the Arab Engineering Bureau's excellent renovation of the Civil Defense Station and the Qatar Museum's current architectural competition, which is focused on the preservation of the grain silos at the port. The Pearl Qatar, an artificial island, is designed to house around 40,000 residents. Considered to be Doha's response to Dubai's Palm, it is the country's first project to offer freehold residential rights to the international community. It's marketed as Riviera Arabia, with luxury lifestyle as a key selling point. In a country with one of the world's highest GDPs per capita, the disparity levels are stark, and human rights represent a real cause for concern. Much to their credit, Qatar Foundation has been at the forefront of this movement, creating new standards and practices for laborers contracted to work on their sites, which are now poised to become national standards. The Qatar Foundation's flagship project, the Multiversity, where we are today, celebrates its 20th anniversary this year. It's still very much an experiment in the making. Qatar Foundation's commitment to design quality, demonstrated through the selection of internationally renowned architects, has resulted in a sort of mecca of contemporary architecture. And now it goes beyond the sort of creation of an object building to become a cohesive, walkable campus. One of the most recent additions to the campus, Mangari Yavar's new Faculty of Islamic Studies complex, speaks to Qatar's ambition to play a major role in defining contemporary Islamic identity and culture. Yet as the country grows and societies change, Qataris struggle to maintain their local culture and customs. The issue of identity, whose identity, takes on great importance. At 3,500 hectares, Lusail is an instant city for over 200,000, immediately abutting Doha to the north and catering to professionals in the oil and gas industries who want to live and work in proximity to Ras Laffan. It incorporates a diversity of public spaces and will be home to the opening stadium for the World Cup. Yet much of Doha's population are excluded from spaces such as this. Instead, they carve out a public realm of their own, opportunistically appropriating open space wherever available in the city. Great cities thrive not just on great public spaces, but on interconnected diversity. And lastly, Ras Laffan. Informally known as Qatar's money machine, Ras Laffan Industrial City is an enormous secure zone an hour north of Doha that produces nearly a third of the world's liquefied natural gas. The workers temporarily housed in Ras Laffan have made it Qatar's de facto second city. GDP per capita, currently the world's highest, is thanks mainly to the phenomenal development of the hydrocarbon sector, which contributes nearly half of the total government revenues. As a result, when times are good, wealth abounds. At the same time, Doha is acquiring problems characteristic of other developed countries, including an increased carbon footprint. Such heavy reliance on hydrocarbons begs the question of a long-term economic stability. Nonetheless, the continued making and remaking of Doha remains nothing short of astonishing. A walk along the Corniche makes evident these changes. The north is anchored by the modernist icon, William Pereira's Sheraton Doha, and the middle sits Ayaan Pei's masterwork, the New Museum of Islamic Art. And further to the south, Jean Nouvel's National Museum is emerging. Doha has arrived, and the various post-independence institutional buildings in between serve as evidence of how it got there. Wooden dhows, vestiges of past fishing and pearling glory, float languidly in the bay, while Qatar's Airways jets, the world's youngest fleet, crisscross overhead. It is these various hybridities that define the city's growth throughout its relatively short and dynamic life. Thank you.